So, hello, Meg. Really nice to have you here. Welcome to our audience in Brazil. Uh, Thank you for being here, for accepting my invitation, and I hope we can talk a lot and bringing lots of good topics for everyone who will be watching.
I love that. Thank you so much, Michelle. It's really an honor to be here and knowing more about your story. And I'm very excited that we found each other.
Great. So I always like to start asking about your educational background. What did you do as your bachelor's degree, as your master's degree, and how you end up uh, where you are today?
My story's not really kind of the direct path. I was a music major in college, so my bachelor's is actually in music. Um, and I started with vocal performance, and I was on track, I guess, for going into doing the opera. That was kind of the main goal. And I ended up getting nodules on my vocal cords. And I mean, they'd probably been there for a little while, right? They just became more pronounced when I was in college. And that's when I first met or discovered speech pathology because I had to see a speech pathologist for healing so that I could learn how to speak without really the way that I do now. So I really abuse my voice on a daily basis just with the way that I talk. Um, and so I realized that I was like, oh, this is not going to then be the path for me. I'm going to have to change directions. And so it kind of left me a little bit amiss about what to do. And I thought that I wanted to go into education. I really love working with kids, but that wasn't really where I ended up going. I ended up going into really high end retail. And so working with like couture clothing in a very nice shop in Dallas, Texas. And so that's what I did to start. And I really hated my life. Do you know the book or the movie, The Devil Wears Prada?
Mhm.
It was just like that. It was horrible.
I
So
can
it was very
imagine.
competitive. Everybody was just trying to see how beautiful they could be all the time. And I was like, this isn't for me. So I moved into commercial real estate and I worked that for many years. And same, I just never really felt fulfilled or that I was really kind of enjoying what I was doing. So I moved to Los Angeles from Dallas and I was there for about 7 years. And I worked in different restaurants and I loved that. I loved the energy of it. I loved food. I loved meeting people, talking with people. But I remember one day I got home and I told my then fiance, I'm not helping anyone. And that doesn't make me feel good. And a friend of mine recommended that I started volunteering at a school. And I started volunteering at this school, and I was in their early learner program. And it was for a lot of kids who had been maybe in and out of the foster care system or were in a secondary caregiver's home. So, like a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle. They had experienced some sort of trauma in very early in their childhood. And so they were 3 and 4 year olds, and they still to this day have my heart. Like I always think about them. Um, and then I started working more with kids. And I think, like many, I fell into ABA then because that's one of those fields that you get introduced to throughout all of these other experiences and exposures. I loved the company that I worked with in LA. It was fantastic. It was in home and community based. So we were in schools and we were in homes. And I really saw the changes in these kids' lives and then in these families' lives. And it was powerful. And I loved it. And I definitely caught the bug, you know.
Mhm.
Um, but the way that it was taught to me was very much from a holistic standpoint, which was you're in school You're here to help support what the speech pathologist is doing. You're here to help support what the occupational therapist is doing. And I think this kind of, when you and I spoke earlier, that's not the message that a lot of behavior analysts receive. It is your science is superior, right? And so for me, I wasn't exposed to that until I got to grad school. And I got to I loved my grad program too. So there's also that. But I remember there were always these conversations about best practices and evidence-based practices. And the message that gets drilled into grad students is ABA is superior to any other therapeutic intervention for individuals with autism. And always in the back of my mind, I was like, that's not right. Right? Like, that's not right. And I was always the one who would advocate in class and say, right, but research actually shows that when we do a holistic approach and our code of ethics says that we're supposed to be working with these other teams, why is our message in grad school not that? So I did have a great grad school experience, but it's not to say that it wasn't without like some concerns or worries, right? Like that was one of them. I loved my fieldwork experience, but some of that experience involved a lot of restraints. And in hindsight, like I'm like, okay, some of those restraints might have been necessary based on whatever it is that's like safety is like if safety is a concern, right? But then I found that it was almost like the go-to, and then it was almost being used almost like a consequence or a punishment procedure. And it broke my heart. And so that was one of those, like, that was like that first flag of, I want my practices to be different than this. Right. So I think supervision can give you that experience too. And so after I concluded that experience, then I ended up working at different clinics and then going on to start my own center, or well, we don't even have a center, my own agency. We're in home. But yeah, that was my path.
Well, totally unexpected. Like you were in a different world for twice, because on the music and then on the fashion world, like completely different. And this is so good because it sends a message that you can change, and like you are not oh, I did this as my bachelor's degree and that's it for me. I will have to spend my whole life on this path. So
no, change it.
Yeah, it was like it is really good because here in Brazil, for example, we need to choose what we want to do when we are 17. Like when I was 17, I was already at the university doing a bachelor's program in law. And I was not sure if I wanted to be a lawyer, but like it had some characteristics that it matched my personality, so I went there. But it's so common, and here in Brazil, that's a bad thing that we have here, because our bachelor's degree is always connected with your profession. So what you choose on your bachelor's degree will define the profession that you will have. And then you do post-graduations to specialize. So to see if you want to go to work, for example, in law, that it's criminal law or is family law, for example. But your profession is already defined. You will be a lawyer or do some or be a judge or anything on the legal career. And then you don't have this opportunity to think and be more mature to make your decisions, because what do you know about life when you were 17? You know nothing.
You know nothing about life.
Yeah. It's pretty tough. That's why here it's so common you have someone who has maybe 2 or 3 bachelor's degree because they change profession and then they have to go back and do a bachelor's program again, that it's a 4 or 5 year program, and then they do some post graduations later to specialize in a specific area. So it's so good to know. I think that many will connect with this story. And in the United States, it's good because you have the opportunity to, okay, you did your bachelor's degree, but you go and do a master's program. And then by your master's program, this will define your profession. That's something that unfortunately we don't have here.
I know. And I realize that is one of those cultural differences that is one of the benefits, I think, of being in the US.
Yeah.
Because we do have that. A lot of graduate programs are looking for experience, and having just experience working with children and working with children that were within the ABA field already. And I will also say, when I did my master's, the program was new. So it was Baylor, and it was the second year that they had an in-person ABA program. And I still don't think they have an online program at all. So they very much were wanting candidates.
Mm-hmm.
I had a very small cohort too.
Yeah.
There were 15 of us, I think.
Wow. Yeah.
And that, again, it's not the norm.
Mm-hmm.
So my education, I think, is one of those things that I recognize is not standard for most people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you did your master's degree, and while you were there, you were already doing your hours for the BCBA. How was your experience with your hours? So it was in a clinic, in a home-based. You talked a little, but just to give us a little more into this. So you were doing your classes and at the same time already working, because you were already working actually previously in a school as a it was
This is an aide.
Yes, okay, an aide. Mm-hmm.
And then after that school, I ended up working for an ABA clinic that was in home and in school. And then that was in Los Angeles. And so I had to move to Waco, Texas for my graduate program for my master's. And the way that Baylor has it set up is you have the opportunity to work both in their nonprofit clinic that Baylor students run.
Mm-hmm.
And you're assigned one client, and that's actually really, really cool. So it gives you a really good intensive support with group supervision and like peer supervision too. It's a cool collaborative experience. But then you also then are given the opportunity to work with a different agency that's in town. And the agency that I worked with was center-based, and we would also go into the school to work directly with some of the clients. And it was a great experience just because it gave me a different experience because I hadn't had clinic experience before. So my master's program gave me that center clinic experience that I also needed.
And what was the set of activities that you usually perform, like doing assessment, doing running programs, this kind of activities?
It was actually really, really a great setup. And it was intense and fast paced. So when I first started, and this is the way they do it with all of the fieldwork students, the first few months, you're just doing direct, taking over and running somebody else's programming. As new learners would join, though, you would start with that intake process. So you would understand how to do that initial assessment, when to conduct a functional analysis. And at that time, we were still doing like experimental functional
Mm-hmm.
analyses. So that was a lot of what we did at the beginning. And then writing programming based on what the initial assessment indicated, as well as what the functional analysis indicated. And then through that, you would meet weekly with the BCBA, who would then go over, okay, now why did you put this program in place? And then once it was in place, okay, it looks like maybe there's something happening because let's look at your data. It's not, it's variable. So then she really would walk us through about how to analyze that data. And we would do then the same thing for that learner that we would have that was just with the grad school, because that was just one client that we would work with. And so we could really then like do some more research-based replications of, let's see what this like, DRL program would do for this particular behavior. Or we got to modify one of the projects that I worked on was modifying a PECS program for a learner,
Mm-hmm.
because he had a lot of property destruction. He would throw things and he would bite things. So we made them to where they were magnets so that it was more effortful to take them off, but he could still arrange them how he needed them to go. And it worked out to be a really good functional replacement for him. But it was a really great experience because of that.
Lots of
And
things to
yeah,
do.
a lot of things to do. And then with that came all of those indirect hours of, now you have to do the research behind it. And of course, all of the assessments too, but yeah.
Yeah. And what do you do now? So you finished your master, you did your board exams.
Mhm.
A lot has changed, I can imagine. So what is your set of activities now? I know that you have a profile on social media that is across environments. So and it's the name of your company. So tell us what do you do now?
Yeah. Well, when I was graduating and when I was sitting for my exam, I was pregnant with my son. So we we had my son. We stayed in Waco until he was about 6 months, and then we moved to Colorado Springs. And I worked for an agency here, and it was great. But after a couple of years, you start to recognize like where your values shift from your company's values, right? And realized, and this was in 2018, that I was ready. So we started with one client and I did BCBA direct. And then we slowly grew from there, where one client, then we hired a part-time RBT. Then we took on another client and another RBT, and we just slowly grew from there. We made some mistakes along the way because everybody grows a little bit too quickly. And then you recognize you can't grow that quickly if you want to provide quality services. And so that's where we are right now. So we're 5 years in to our company. We have about 24 employees. I don't even know really how many clients we have, but but I do know that we have it manageable for all of our BCBAs. So we have 2 BCBAs right now, but we have one who's sitting for her exam shortly, and we have hired another one who's going to be starting with us at the end of May, so that we can better support our supervisees and better support our learners and their families. Most of our staff, or most of our BCBAs, have a caseload of about 7, because we want to make sure that it's very manageable for everyone and they can really provide that quality supervision and intensive support that in-home really does require. Um, and it's been good. My husband does all of our numbers. He does our operations. And I'm so very, very thankful for him. In fact, he just sent a message to all of our staff letting them know that there are lots of police out today. So to be careful driving between sessions.
Oh my God.
Sorry, that just made me laugh.
No problem at all. And why?
Um,
He did not say why.
oh, why? Yeah, I know. I don't know why. Like, okay, I don't know why. But it's been great. So we very much have a very family oriented company. All of most of our RBTs are also moms. And so we really try to support that as well with their schedule and their availability and giving them the flexibility to understand, yes, sometimes your child is going to be sick. We understand that.
Yeah.
And not penalizing them for that. And I think you understand that as a mom.
Yeah.
You often, I'm sure, pulled like, do I got this very important thing that I need to do, or my child is sick? Which do you choose? And we don't want to make our employees make that choice. They shouldn't have to.
Yeah, of course. And that's a value that it's being, I don't know, after COVID, I feel that people are more sensitive for these kinds of issues and uh, and what to look in a job. They're more selective. I don't know, the word like really changed after COVID. Like it feels that it was like 10 years and it was just like 3 years ago, but I don't know, things changed so fast
It was
after
such a fast
COVID.
change.
Yeah, I don't know if I think that it's worldwide. It's not just like in one country, but it's like a whole worldwide
It was a
thing.
huge shift
Yeah,
across the world. Yeah, I
yeah.
agreed.
So how do you organize the company? So you said that you have usually the BCBA has a caseload of 7 clients. So someone goes and want to hire the service that it's in home and in the community, right?
Yes. And we
How does
are,
it?
yeah. So we're in the process right now of opening a center just to help support with some other needs that we're noticing too for social skills and social
A
development with some of our
physical
learners.
location.
Mhm.
Okay.
But mostly so that that can be the primary idea is for socialization, as opposed to those intense therapy rooms. We want everything to be very generalizable. As you can
Okay.
tell from across environments, that's really my main mission is to make sure that what we're doing is going to generalize across the most meaningful environments for these learners. So that's when we start the intake process, that's how we start. We start with what's most meaningful for that family and for that learner. Then we really then try to make sure that what we're doing is individualized and tailored for that particular learner based on what the caregiver's story is about their child and about themselves. And then we directly interact with that learner, but without being intrusive. We let them let us in, if that makes sense.
Yep, totally.
Because when they show us, instead of having us direct us, or instead of us directing them, they show us so much more. They show us those strengths without having to give that do this prompt, right?
Look at me, look at me.
Right? Or saying
Yeah.
their name over and over and over again.
Mhm.
It's, I know many of us feel this way. Those of us who have found each other on like Instagram within that community, this is what resonates with us.
Yeah.
Um, it's nails on a chalkboard to hear some of these things. So we just kind of allow for that open assessment, that child-led assessment. And then we do a process-based functional analysis from there. So I might then say something like, hey, let's go transition someplace else. Let's go to this area over here. And if I see any resistance whatsoever, I'm going to know transitions are going to be difficult. I don't need to push this learner further to know that. So I'm going to mark this down. Okay. Then I might just do a little bit of probing. One of my favorites, this was a 2-year-old learner. And I said, hey, do you like taking baths? And he said, yes, I love water. And he got so happy. And then I said, okay, do you like to wash your hair? No. Do we have to? And I didn't need to know that bath time was probably fun, but doing those general like hygiene things were probably not great. So again, like you don't have to push to see everything to know that there's something there. And you're going to then really make sure that what you keep intact is the therapeutic relationship. That learner is going to trust you so much more when you present something that might change their behavior, which can sometimes be somewhat aversive. But if it's paired with you, you're a safe person. I'm going to be okay because I trust you. And that is 100% how we do our training with our behavior technicians when they start with us, is this whole shift of, hey, if you're coming from another ABA company, everything that we do is going to look different to you. And it might seem hard and it might be difficult. So we'll work through those together. But that's how we try to do things differently. We really do love to meet with our OTs and our speech paths and our physical therapists and the school team, because without all of us working together as one, that learner is going to feel supported in some areas and really let down in others. So we have to make sure that what we're doing is supporting each other, not belittling or hurting each other, in all honesty, because all that's doing is hurting the client.
Yeah. And you talked about something that I usually talk about, that it's the relationship that, for example, each RBT has it with their own client. So we know that in the United States, lots of BCBAs and RBTs complaining about the billing hours that, for example, if I work for you and I am an RBT and I'd say you, okay, Meg, today I can't go because my son is sick, so I won't be able to attend my 3 clients that I have in the afternoon. And you, as the owner or the BCBA, because sometimes this roles does not match.
Right.
But for example, you are the BCBA of the cases, and then you call another RBT and ask them, oh, I need for you to attend 2 clients of Michelle because she can't go. And we have this generalization idea that it's important, yes. And when we talk about generalization, people like to say, oh, okay, we need to have my program written according to the dimensions of ABA that should be technological. So everyone can read and understand and will be able to run this program. But what about this personal relationship that I have with my clients that my other colleague will not have? Yeah. Will not like it will not be able to write everything about my client on my session notes or on at my data about this family.
It would be totally skewed.
Yeah. So the people think that this is what ABA means. So, oh, we need to be technological. And okay, you have a really good program that anyone with experience could run. And this kid need to perform this action with anyone, because this is all about generalization, and that's what life is. So people lost their balance. I think the therapists, and they want to do this, and the kid have like 3 or 4 RBTs. Here we don't call RBTs, but it's the same, like running programs. So it has 3 or 4 of these professionals, and more the SLP, OTs. Like, it's a lot for an adult. Imagine for a kid. So I would like you to elaborate and reflect a little on this, because the we have the owner perspective that, oh, we need to make profit. Of course, we all need money to survive. But also it has the perspective on the parents, that sometimes they think, oh, my BCBA said that it's research based, so that's what is best, because that's science and that's works.
Mm-hmm.
And all this mess, and like the parents, they don't have the knowledge to make all these decisions.
No, oh my gosh, you're exactly right. Like, where's it's impossible to claim social validity if the parents aren't actually informed. So speaking of research and what's research backed, most hours that are fulfilled do not surpass 80%. So if you as a BCBA recommend 40 hours, only 80% of those per week can you account for, or can you claim are actually going to happen. That's what the research says. So if you're budgeting for everybody to be at 100%, that's poor business management. That's not on your RBTs, and that's not on your clients for canceling, right? Because that also happens.
Mm-hmm.
You have to look at what past performance indicates. And if it is only 60%, that's what you're going to budget for that learner. If that means you need to take on another client, then that's what you do to help with that. If that also means that when you are talking about substitute sessions, what are your expectations for that substitute? Because they shouldn't be the same for somebody who has this very strong therapeutic relationship. In fact, what that goal for that substitute session should be is, can this therapeutic relationship generalize? Can this learner also learn how to establish a therapeutic relationship with this RBT or behavior technician? Can this behavior technician establish a therapeutic relationship with this learner? That's the data that should be collected for those sessions. Not, can they do the same task analysis that the same RBTs worked with them for the past 2 years can do? That's not going to be an accurate depiction. Why would he do that for you? He doesn't know you. Why is he going to show you everything that he knows? He doesn't trust you. So when we think about these substitute sessions, if they can happen with somebody that's actually on the team, fantastic. Make that happen, coordinate that. It might take some more brain power on your scheduling, but that's worth it for the individualized needs of the client, right? If for some reason, though, that's just not available and the BCBA can't take that session direct, because that happens, and you don't want to cancel and you want to do a substitute session, you have to then measure and tamper what your expectations are for everybody, so that the caregivers are aware this is going to look different, and so that the RBT knows this is going to look different. That would be
Yeah.
those are my recommendations.
Yeah. Great. And so usually what are the roles, for example? So you receive someone and it has the intake process. Uh what usually the BCBA do and the RBT do? So you will first have to choose an RBT according to their schedule and their location on someone who fits this profile for this new client. So where does it each professional role begins and ends? Because it's a different dynamic inside the ABA that it's different, I think, for any other profession. So usually people hear that we don't have all this organized setting of supervision and all the rules. They get confused. So what is my role? What's your role? And even in the United States, when things are, it has an ethical code and the BACB, even
It's
then.
still hard.
Yeah.
We literally have a visual communication tree. And some of our staff still are like, but what's my role? Well, it's in this picture.
Am I entering in your role? So I think that people has this kind of confusions, especially because the RBT, they are directly every day or more times a week with the client and the family.
Yes,
so
they are the front line.
Yeah.
They're really the voice that should be heard the most, in my opinion. But, and I say this with a pretty big but, because I love RBTs. I do. And coming from being like before there were RBTs, like being a behavior technician back in the day and going from there, I still love doing direct. It's one of my favorite things to do. The difference that I think that my worry sometimes is that we don't train our RBTs well enough to think critically in the moment to make those decisions that we're counting on them to make within the programming that we write. So instead, what ends up happening are these almost robotic and rigid responses to behavior, whether it's a positive thing that we want to see or not a great thing that we want to see, right? We're creating these kind of robotic responses. I read there was a brand new article that just came out that was talking about how the ratio of reinforcement. And I was like, are we really doing this again? Why do we need another study to quantify the number of reinforcement given for rates of responding? Can't you realize that it's just what we were just talking about, the therapeutic relationship? You're going to do something more for somebody that you like, not more for somebody who gives you a sliver of a Skittle. And I that's what I worry about with what we do with our training with our behavior technicians. So I think this is a long-winded roundabout answer.
And I get, yep.
But I think that that's really what the change that needs to happen in our field is how we're communicating with our RBTs and allowing for our RBTs to communicate with us so that they can point out, this doesn't feel natural. This doesn't feel like I'm doing something to benefit the learner, so that as BCBAs, we can modify our programming and our training to make it more natural, to make it more flexible. And that's my hope, is that we can shift everybody's practices this way.
And while you were talking, and that's something that I really talk with my husband, that is a lawyer. He doesn't practice like we are together in our company, but he always talk about ethics and professional relationships and professional roles, that it's come really connected with the legal world. And I was thinking, why the people who stays more time with the kids in the front line are the less trained. Because, for example, they have a 40 hours training. Okay, they have supervision, but we know the gaps that supervision has it. And sometimes you need to take an action, like you just said, like you need to take some decision. And I will not be able, okay, kid, just wait a second. I will call my supervisor to see it.
Right.
What should I do? How should I respond? Like, they are the less trained. So if we would compare, like, for example, the nurses in the United States, they are at the front line in hospitals, and they are really trained a lot.
Yes.
Some, they can prescribe even medicines, that it's something that we don't have here in Brazil. Here we have like all the power with the doctors, but the nurses, they do the front line, the hard work. Or okay, the doctors does it too, but they are in the front line.
Yeah.
And the RBTs
They're
are
working the
same.
long hours.
Yeah. And they are the less trained. Like, I don't know. I can't remember of other profession that it has a similarity. And we have so little training, because all it's based in supervision. And if you don't have it, but even with a good supervision, there is
Right.
not
It's
time.
lacking. Yeah. So as a company owner, that's something that we really try to combat. We really, really focus a lot on training after the 40 hours. So once a month, everybody gets together for just like a regular good old staff meeting, but we don't just limit it there, because then we found that if we meet an additional time, then we can do that more honed in small group supervision team meetings. And then what we do is we also include most of our staff in a lot of our training opportunities. So we had the Greg Hanley workshop come to Colorado not too long ago. And so we had two of our behavior technicians join us for that, so that they received that training too. And it wasn't just our BCBAs trying to absorb that information and then pass it on. Instead, they had that empowerment and that direct training. We really encourage that a lot. And it costs more to do those types of things. And so I understand that that's not something that every company is willing to do, but you also shouldn't penalize your staff for seeking out other trainings. And I've seen that happen at other agencies, where it's almost as though if they seek out something that's more compassionate, those voices are then silenced, and they're not then allowed to say like, hey, but I saw this trauma-informed care event and I participated in it, and I think that that might benefit with this learner. And instead, they're removed from that client's team. So it's unfortunate that it's the voices of power that are silencing some of the voices that are of reason.
Yeah. We have two themes that you just had that are really hot at the moment. So it's really a lot of social media speaking about that. It's trauma-informed care. So you have a trauma-informed service, and the other is compassionate ABA. So if you could tell everyone what is this, because we still don't have like this a lot,
It's a
especially
lot.
in
Yeah.
Portuguese. We actually don't have it, and most contents, they are not accessible because I don't know what is the percent of people who speaks English or read in English, because speaking in English is different than reading, than listening in other language. So if you could tell people what it is, so what it is trauma informed care, because when I started to read about this, I only found things that it's from other areas and not specifically from ABA.
Yeah, you're right. You're not wrong there. So Ditu Rajaraman published an article a few years ago that really pulled from research from other fields about the importance of what trauma-informed care looks like, and that our role isn't to treat trauma, but our role is to assume that if at least 50% of people have reported having experienced trauma, we can assume that more have in fact experienced trauma or a traumatic event. We can also know from other research that one or two people can experience the same event and one have perceived trauma and the other not. So the whole idea of trauma-informed care and trauma-informed ABA is to assume that trauma has either happened or will happen in this person's life. Our job is to not be a part of that traumatic history. So that comes from gaining assent and recognizing assent withdrawal. So if a demand is placed, check in first. Hey, before we get started, are you ready? Good.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If they're not ready, oh, you weren't ready. Okay, let's give it a minute. Let's see what we can do to get back into it as quickly as possible so we don't lose momentum. But I'm also not going to push, because what can that lead to? Coercion, right? Holding, physical manipulation, anything along those lines that can potentially, again, it's not my perception. It doesn't matter what my perception is. It matters what this individual's perception is. And if it's their perception that touching them is somewhat traumatizing or re-traumatizing, I'm not going to do it. So that means before I touch somebody, I'm going to ask them, is it okay if I touch you? That means that when I'm doing toileting, I'm going to make sure that they know, hey, I'm going to be in here with you in your space, but I'm also going to move myself away from your space the more independent that you become, so that you can learn that when this door is closed, that's your private time. And no adult can be in there during this private time. So all of these things are how we try to build our practices. And these are pulling from, again, other sciences and other research, but also under the framework of recognizing other voices have spoken up. Other voices have said what's traumatizing. We don't need to necessarily publish a research study about that. First of all, I don't think anybody in the field of ABA is going to publish it.
Yeah. That's not something that they usually look at, because it's connected with like, oh, that's a mental health issue, and that's not our business. So it has all this culture inside the science.
It has a lot of culture, but you're a part of the environment. And you as an adult who is teaching is part of that learner's history and part of their story and part of how they become what they become.
Yeah. And compassionate ABA, I was talking to someone, I don't know, I believe it was with Carissa, or I don't know if it was with her, but it was with someone from social media, that compassionate ABA, for me, it was a word that it should not have to exist. Because if you were dealing with someone, this is so obvious that you should be compassionate, especially when you're dealing with an autistic person or any disability or any neurodivergent. So this was not supposed to be something that we should like remember someone, that your practice should be compassionate.
Right. You shouldn't have to be told, or you shouldn't have to say, I'm a good person.
Yeah.
You should just be a good person.
Yeah. But that's something that I don't know, things were lost on the way. And this name, it had to come, it had to become a thing. Compassionate ABA. Why do you think that all the ABA history, everything, why we end up having to bring something that it's compassionate ABA?
Well, because unfortunately you have to distinguish some sort of ABA. The unfortunate thing, though, is that everybody's then adopting that they're a compassionate ABA provider. Everybody's adopting that
it became a marketing thing.
It became a marketing thing, 100%. And it's continuing, I think, on that path, unfortunately. So I guess my advice would be to anybody who's seeking ABA services is check, ask to observe, sign the non-disclosure agreement or the NDA so that you can observe and say, okay, I want to see these compassionate practices. I want to see you interact with my child. And if after the assessment, I don't see that you're compassionate, I'm going to say thank you, but I'm not actually going to pursue services with you. And I think that should be what families need to do more. But I think that in a lot of areas, and especially in the US, we don't have this problem in Colorado. It's crazy. But in a lot of areas, there are no other options. And there are some states in the Northeast where there are 2 ABA agencies. I think there are 2 in like all of Delaware. That's it. So these families literally can't choose between kind of crappy ABA and even crappier ABA, both claiming to be a compassionate ABA provider. And I don't know what it is in Brazil, but I can't imagine that there are a ton of choices for these families to go.
No.
Yeah. But then you have markets like Colorado and Texas and Florida and California, where you have a million agencies to choose from. And it can be very overwhelming for families. And then they see what the norm is, and they're like, well, I guess all ABA is like this. So it doesn't matter if you say that you're compassionate or not. And it's exhausting for parents to try to make another choice. And the unfortunate thing that a lot of ABA agency owners know and bank on is that they're not going to go find another choice.
Yeah. I see that. And most of time, like parents, they don't want to start all over again, all the intake process and assessment and everything. So it's pretty hard. So I have one last question because I want to let you go. I could stay here all afternoon talking to you. But Do you have some insights that you have while you were in grad school doing your master's program? You said, no, I had a good master's program, but I believe that you learned the basis,
Oh,
but
yeah.
then you started to adjust and change a lot of your thoughts on the way you feel about things, because like you said, you start to having a clear vision on your values, and I believe a lot has changed on what you learned, on what actually you do.
Yeah.
Could you think on what was the major changes, the way you see a client, the way you run a program, the way you see the disability?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that maybe for now, many programs could has changes, and then we already has it since the master's program, people having this kinds of information, but you did not have this opportunity. I did not have. I was on a more restrict program on a different vision of a disability.
Yeah.
Like, I had said things and done things that I regret on. I think we all do. That it's part of on where we were trained. uh and this is also could be a red flag for the ones who are studying, to see these kinds of things in the programs that are red flags, that are not good things to be on your professional life.
Yeah. If you're like, this would be my takeaway from grad school that was one of those shifts. And I talked about this a little bit earlier. I saw restraints happen all the time. If you're seeing restraints happen daily, if you're seeing what somebody's referring to as an extinction burst happening daily, that's not, first of all, it's not an extinction burst if it's happening every day. Secondly, if your client or your learner or anybody that you see in your environment is being restrained that often, the antecedents are not supporting that learner's needs. Their skills are not being addressed. So really what that was for me was when I recognized if there were a lot of restraints happening or a lot of challenging behaviors happening, or like for long durations, that it was me, right? Going back to that therapeutic relationship. It was something that I had done, not something that the learner needed to work through. So that was when I recognized, even in my own practices, how I could shift. Like, and even when I thought I was a compassionate BCBA, I recognized that I wasn't truly listening to my learners. Right. But one day, and this was with one of them, and she's a teenager now, and she still struggles every now and then, but not to the extent, like we were seeing self-injurious behaviors to the point of blood. And I was just like, what is happening? How have we went through, she has master functional communication training. Girlfriend can ask for a break. We have completely weaned that schedule of reinforcement to where like she can work through anything. So here I was like thinking that I was this amazing BCBA doing all of these evidence-based treatments. And I recognized that it still wasn't enough. And so that's when I was like, I've got to do some more research. And I started really paying attention to presentations at conferences. And Jonathan Tarbox did one on ACT at WEBA, but it was about ACT for yourself, as ACT as a BCBA for yourself. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's really good. And then I did more research about ACT, and I recognized, oh my gosh, I can do this with my learners. This is what this learner needs, because this isn't attention maintained problem behavior. This is belonging and the fear of being rejected manifesting itself on a daily basis to the point of self-harm. And as soon as we pinpointed that, her self-injury stopped. And as soon as we were able to put in place like what she actually values, we were able to use that to prompt her through things. And then we were able to find committed actions and leisure skills and different activities that she wanted to truly work on to get her closer to her values. So that whenever she had a tricky situation, she could then prompt herself with something to engage in the present moment. And if that wasn't working, she could do a little bit of self-talk about how she used to punch herself in the nose to the point where she bled. And now here she is in a general education science class doing what she loves to do with the peers that she wants to be with. That's something that she values. And when it starts getting really tricky, she can take a drink of water. She can sing a song to herself. She can ask to take a walk outside. She can do all of these things to diffuse from the moment so that she can accept that she has come a very long way. And even though she's in a very sticky situation, she's going to make it through it. And that was what it was really one learner's self-injurious behavior that manifested out of quote unquote nowhere after she had gone through every evidence-based treatment possible that grad school taught us.
Yeah.
So grad school is literally 101. Everything else is where you will find behavior change. So you have to go to those CEUs. You have to attend those conferences. You have to watch those recordings of those presentations and actively participate. Don't just have them on in the background while you're folding laundry, but really engage with them so that you're learning something so that you can change your practices as opposed to just, I don't know why this learner's behavior's not changing.
And always have the defense that, oh, I am doing everything that is evidence-based. I have done all it, and my practice is evidence-based, and that's what it is. And the problem is because he's autistic, or he's this, or he's that.
Or the parents keep reinforcing the challenge behavior.
That's another frequently assumption.
Yeah.
Amazing, Meg. I just have to thank you a lot for your time, for giving us your knowledge, your thoughts, your reflection. I hope that we can have other opportunities to talk more of other topics. We have so much to cover, but I just want to say how important it is for us to having this conversation and having this kind of content being distributed with subtitles in Portuguese, like we will have for everyone, because I know many people that want to give up on working with this population because of these practices. And we can't afford to lose professionals because we have lots of kids and parents and teenagers and adults who needs these services.
Yes, absolutely. You're 100%.
So it makes all the difference for us and for all those who need these services here in Brazil. So many thanks.
Thank you, Michelle. I really appreciate your time today. This was fun.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a great day.
Bye.